Are you taking this very seriously?
Yeah, always. I'm a professional.
Welcome.
Step right up. We did that before. We'll try a new approach.
To the Grand Tour 2.
Step right up. Come on in. If you'd like to take the grand tour of a lonely house that once was home.
Yep, this is the grand tour. This is the mechanical tour of the ox, the ins and outs, the nitty gritty. Last time we showed you our sort of living arrangement. This is how it all works.
I'm going to show you our engine, drivetrain, suspension, all that cool stuff.
The exciting stuff.
Yeah.
Right, okay, this McLeodus, under the bonnet.
Under the bonnet,
Tell us.
the 1HZ engine. These engines are legendary for their reliability and their ability to just keep on trucking and keep on going even in really, really harsh conditions. That's why they're used in mines all over Australia, why so many people choose them to get on rough, crazy tracks while they're the workhorse of so many farm operations. They just keep on going. It's not uncommon for them to get to 1 million Ks. This one is about 500,000 and she's still perfect. We love her. So the 1HZ, you can find it in all sorts of vehicles and all sorts of Toyotas. You can get it in the 105, the 80 series, and of course the 75. Ours is a naturally aspirated 1HZ. It's very common with these to fit an aftermarket turbo because they can be pretty gutless. We are often in a position where we are going up the hill at a 100 km/h speed limit, going about 35, with caravans and trucks rushing past us. That's something that we are not that bothered by, purely because we want to use this to go into the desert. We're not interested in highway driving. However, a lot of people do fit aftermarket turbos to get a bit more power, which is just not something that we are interested in doing. As we say, we really value reliability over power, and that is the big reason. Briefly, a naturally aspirated engine is reliant on the vacuum of the piston coming down and sucking that air in. That's what naturally aspirated is. A turbo uses the exhaust fumes to power a turbine, hence turbo, which powers a compressor, and that gives forced induction to the engine. It just forces way more air in there and therefore way more power. It's just one more thing to go wrong as far as we're concerned. People do it very successfully, but it's just not something that we wanted to do. If we were going to fit a turbo, we would go whole hog and get the 1HDT engine, which is, you can find it in the 80 series Saharas. A friend of ours has one of those, and we have joked with him that he may one day turn the key to find his engine missing. But if we were going to turbocharge this, we would, take it to Terrain Tamer and rebuild it with the 1HDT, a proper factory turbo engine, rather than fitting an aftermarket. It's really bog standard. It's all pretty much factory. Even things like the secondary fuel filter that we put in, that was this was a factory setup. It was just put in after the 1992 1HZs. So we just went to a Wreckers and got one. But this is a 1991. It's a lazy engine, but that's so that it will just keep on going. That's kind of why they built them like that. The other great thing about the 1HZ, and the reason why it's so reliable, is because it's a purely mechanical engine. Like, as you probably know, most newer engines are reliant on all sorts of electronics for electronic injection. This is totally mechanical. But for us, our alternator could die in the middle of the desert and we could still keep on going. It wouldn't really hold us up. And that's what's so great about this. It's all just purely mechanical. It's built big, it's built to last. It's lazy, it's underpowered, but she will always keep going, and that's why we love it.
Yep, amen.
Carrying on from our engine is our gearbox and transfer case, which is all brand new. We've got it done. Everything pretty much started wearing out at the 500,000 mark. Our transfer case had been a bit leaky for a little while, but it was still functioning and still fine.
This is our transfer box. It looks as though we've got this output shaft seal here is leaking. And we've got various leaks around.
Leaking going on.
It looks a bit like a Land Rover transmission actually at the moment.
But our gearbox just started to slip out at first. So about a year ago now, we got it replaced with another factory Toyota one, which is kind of amazing that you can still buy them. This vehicle is 30 years old. You can still get the exact same gearbox, which is the HZJ75. And while we're rebuilding the gearbox, because as I said, it was slipping out first, we thought, well, we might as well just get everything replaced from the flywheel back. So replaced our clutch, our spigot bearings, our transfer case and gearbox, and just everything all at once. Nice shiny new gearbox for the next 500,000, which should easily last.
But we couldn't just stop there, because obviously we've just already overhauled that. It's like, well, geez. So took the prop shafts off. That's the correct terminology, propeller shafts. You have the rear one and you have the front one, commonly called tail shafts. But we actually removed those. There was no need to go and buy new ones, but what we did do was take them down to Hardy Spicer, who specialise in drive shafts, and we basically re-splined them. Now, if you probably know a little bit about, you'll know that the propeller shaft needs to be able to change length. So in order to do that, it's splined, so it can, and the splines over time, over 500,000 Ks, of driving that rear diff, and driving the vehicle, obviously they wear a bit, so they can be actually removed and replaced, welded new splines on, so it's nice and tight. And then we had the uni joints obviously replaced with the good Hardy Spicer uni joints, and we had the prop shafts balanced. They spin them up at high speed and balance them, and so they're basically like new. Then they gave them a nice fresh coat of paint, and yeah. And of course our differential already was recently overhauled and rebuilt, because we put a Eaton Harrop E-locker in it.
Diff locks. So we've got a rear diff lock on ours. We chose to go for the Eaton Harrop E-locker. Which we have found fantastic, to be honest. When we weighed up the options, we were thinking about going for an air locker, but for us, an e-locker makes much more sense. Again, we're all about reliability. We consider ourselves overlanders over forward drivers, and the e-locker is really just 2 wires that goes into the diff. Very easy to wire up. I've wired it up myself, and the back of our garage. If they snag and they split, then we can easily repair that. It's something we can easily do in the bush. We've got everything we need to do that. An air locker, we're talking about 100 psi of pressure going through that, and if that breaks, we're not going to be able to repair it. So that was like a main thing for us. The downside with an e-locker is it is supposed to have sort of a pause with the wheel turn. So I think rock crawlers have found that when they're going back and forth, there's like a bit of a what am I trying to say?
There's a period there where the diff becomes open again.
Yeah, and
between locked on the forward side and locked on the rear side.
Yeah.
About half of a wheel turn, which can be a big difference.
Yeah. Which I can understand would be a big deal if you were, a dedicated forward driver in a rock crawler, but as you know, we're not. We're more about desert travel. We're more about, the journey, less about, doing crazy forward drive tracks. So for us, it just is not enough for a plus point for us to go for an air locker. A lot of people fit the diff lock on the front. The reason for that is they think that they have a diff lock in the back already. This truck has a limited slip diff in the back, and that is supposed to act, as the name suggests, it's a limited slip. So it's supposed to limit how much the diff is going to slip in those forward driving situations. The reality is they don't really work. As like a regular diff, you know, with the wheels moving on a highway, perfect, it's really reliable. But in a forward driving situation when you really need it, in practice it doesn't work. So our truck is way heavier on the back, just from the way it's set up, you know, it's got a full living space in the back. So the rear is really heavy, it's also got the sub tank and everything, and water tank on the back, so it makes a lot more sense for us to have it on the rear. Diff lock, just briefly, I'm sure you all know why we need a diff lock, but some people might not. So when a car is going on a highway or a regular road, those wheels need to be able to turn at different speeds, so that when it's going around, you know, a sharp bend, one wheel is going to be turning a lot more than the other, you know, to take it to corner. Whereas a diff lock is necessary when you're in like a forward driving situation or a difficult situation and your wheel is spinning, because your diff is always going to give all the power to the wheel with the least resistance. That's a really big problem if one of them is up in the air, because all the power is going to that one that's just spinning in the air, and then you're stuck. So a diff lock means that both those wheels turn at the same time, so that even the one that's up in the air, that's not going to get more power than the one on the ground. Both going to be able to get the power to keep on turning and get out of those difficult situations. And we have used the diff lock for that, and it's been fantastic. So we're really happy with it.
And it's allowed us to basically travel places on those more rougher tracks where we don't have to use momentum so much, and we can put that locker in and just sort of crawl our way up things with less risk of damage, a bit more control. So at this stage that has already transformed its off-road capabilities, and yeah, so that's the reason. So we've never had to really look at our rear diff. That's pretty good, everything in there is good. But our transmission, really, we had both front and rear prop shafts plus transfer box and gearbox and clutch all brand new. So we're looking at hopefully many more years of reliable service out of those components.
Alright, so on the front we've got the Warn 9.5 XP winch, which we love. As you can see, it's got the steel rope still rather than the plasma, which is a bit of a rare choice these days. And it's also not totally a Warn winch anymore. So basically, it's a Warn winch, but with a 6.5 horsepower good winch bow motor. We're powered through an all-bright contactor pack with our own in-cab switch. In-cab switch that Jade very cleverly wired up, and we couldn't find anything else about that, so he might even show you how he did that and how you can do it yourself, so you can control your winch in the cab without having to get out. There's just so much to say about it. We're going to give you a whole other video just on our winch because we think it's that important, so stay tuned for that.
Suspension and tyres. Right, so this is a subject we've wanted to talk about. We've got a few requests asking us about this, so it's a pretty fair call. Where to begin? Well, suspension wise, it's a HZJ75. They are a leaf sprung vehicle, just like the 40s were before them. Front and rear leaves, and series Land Rovers as well. 60 series. It was really the standard four-wheel drive suspension setup back in the day. The leaf spring goes all the way back to horse and carts, incidentally, and it's a really crude suspension setup. You know, you basically have these big semi-elliptical spring steel packs that are attached by a shackle at one end and a pin at the other, and they just kind of, it's not very comfortable. And it's not real good to drive on the road, and it doesn't give you a massive amount of axle articulation or flex. But what it is really good at, it's very simple, it's very reliable, and it's very strong. And it's also really good at carrying heavy loads. And that is the reason why the 70 series and the 40 series had that type of suspension primarily. And even to this day, most modern utes still have leaves on the back because that's where the load is. So there's no doubt that as a load carrying suspension, leaf springs are still superior. We've got King springs with superior engineering shackles and pins, 2-inch lift. Now 2-inch lift is the most lift that you want really in an Overlander. Anything beyond that is in any case illegal without engineering approval, and it's just going to put too much strain on your driveline. It upsets the whole dynamics of the driveline. It's going to wear out pinions, it's going to wear out bearings, it's going to wear out prop shafts and uni joints, and not to mention your steering and all sorts of handling issues. So with that in mind, it's all about trying to mitigate the disadvantages and try to come up with a setup that reasonably works. One of the tricks to that is the springs have to be strong enough to carry the weight, but not too strong that it becomes bone-jarringly bad. And anyone who has a ute will know if it's got heavy springs and there's no load in the back, it can be really, really awful. But this is okay because this is constantly loaded. So our springs are matched pretty well to our weight. We get enough flex out of them, but they're stiff enough to be able to support the weight. And of course it's taken me a long time to get this right. It's a bit of a trial and error type thing, you know, because yeah, you can't have them too heavy, but they can't be too light. They've got to be just about right for the vehicle's weight and application. The other thing is we use the fairly big heavy duty anti-inversion shackles. They are laterally stiffer, so they're less likely to flex that way. The other thing that we do that most people don't do these days is we stick with the genuine original Toyota rubber bushes. Now it's just a bush, but I'm going to talk about it a bit because I think it's pretty key to our suspension setup. So I used to have always ran poly bushes, which seemed to be the norm. Any aftermarket suspension place, just about all of them fit these greasable shackles and poly bushes, nolethane. They're made out of basically a sort of a plastic. I have found that they rarely last more than 20,000 Ks in our application. Whether you grease them or not makes no difference. And what happens with them is the shackle pin starts to wear through them. And before you know it, it's starting to contact the spring eye, or you know, so I had a lot of trouble. I was replacing bushes all the time until I had a good suspension guy say to me, look, do yourself a favour and go to Toyota and get the genuine rubber bushes. Put them in with a little bit of rubber grease and that's it. And that's what I've done. I've never had any problem with bushes since. Not only that, the rubber bushes ride a bit better. They're a bit softer, they're a bit more forgiving. There's flex in them, you know. There's a reason why Toyota fitted them. So I will never go back to nolethane or poly bushes again. In fact, the combination of our springs with those rubber bushes and those shackles is almost approaching the perfect leaf spring setup. And I say almost because there's one other addition that we did before the canning, which has also transformed our suspension. And that is, of course, the shock absorber. Shock absorbers are essential on coil sprung vehicles, and they're important on leaf sprung vehicles. I will point out that another advantage of leaf sprung vehicles is if a shock absorber should fail, a leaf sprung vehicle leaf springs have an inherent natural damping because of the friction of the leaves against each other. So a shock absorber failing doesn't necessarily render the vehicle undrivable. But that said, you still want the best you can buy, and we've got the best money can buy in our opinion, and that is the Coney Raid 90. Now, I like Coney Raids because they are a huge shock. We'll show you some images of them. They're a massive shock, and they're an oil shock. And so again, like the theme of the vehicle, they're a really, really simple design. Incredibly simple. Like, there's no external reservoir, there's no remote valving, it's not a tinkerer's kind of, it's a real honest, simple, big shock absorber. And made by Coney. They're made in Holland, I think. They've got a lot of rallying history, and that's where their R&D is done. But they're just brilliant, and they're a shock that you can keep forever. When you can send them off, and they will actually oil them and overhaul them, basically change the oil and stuff. So they're designed to last forever. You know, they're not a throwaway item. Not cheap, but yeah, just And I think that pretty much constitutes our suspension setup. I would say that it is still a leaf spring vehicle and you can't get around that, but it's probably about as good as you're going to get, I think. Well, while we're on suspension, of course part of that suspension setup really is your wheels and tyres. Again, we're pretty conservative and pretty common. We tend to pick things that just just make travelling in the outback easier. And having said that, 16-inch rims, pretty much a no-brainer. That's just the most common normal size out there, and it just makes sense. We use a steel rim, not an alloy rim. Again, steel is just more durable, more reliable. You can bash it back into shape. You could strap a chain around it and you could bury it in the ground and winch out off it. All the things you can't do with an alloy rim. Tubeless, again a no-brainer. I used to run split rims many years ago, but nobody's doing that anymore, and after running these I can see why. I still think there's a place for splitties, but tubeless is just awesome. The tyre that we choose is the Toyo Open Country all-terrain. Again, an all-terrain, so it makes sense for an overland vehicle. We don't really want a mud terrain. Something a little bit more aggressive would be good. We'll talk about tyres just briefly because Toyo, I absolutely love Toyo. We do go off-road a fair bit. I mean, we are interested in going off-road, but we still recognise that overlanders are going to spend time on the tarmac and they're going to spend time on fairly smooth dirt roads as well. So you need a tyre that really, and it's not, you're asking a tyre to do a lot. You want a tyre that works well in the mud, that works well in the sand, in the desert, that is still comfortable and not noisy on the road, all those things. So Toyo, this all-terrains do the job fantastically. The size we run at the moment is a 265/75 R16, 16 being the rim size. 265 is the width of the tyre, and 75 is 75% of that width is the sidewall height. Now, that's a pretty common standard size tyre, and it's a good size tyre, but Toyo have been putting out this tyre which is a 255, so it's a bit narrower, 85, so the sidewall, so it's narrower and taller. It seems like an ideal sort of tyre, so that may be a consideration for us down the track tyre, but I can't really fault these. They just don't give you as much sidewall height, therefore your ground clearance is slightly increased with a taller tyre. So the disc brakes we recently replaced because they were getting pretty old and they weren't stopping that well. We've gone to Terrain Tamer because basically it's either genuine Toyota or Terrain Tamer for us as far as we're concerned. They're the only parts that go on this truck these days, and maybe they'll sponsor us too, but I don't know. There's definitely a lot of real estate here, guys, for the sponsorship, because we've looked at a lot of their products, we've used a lot of their products, and I think in some ways they actually do improve some of the original equipment stuff. And this is an example of how these brakes are actually a slotted and drilled disc rotor, and they use a ceramic pad. So they are going to probably, the rotors may wear quicker because they're being clamped by these really hard ceramic pad material, but the stopping power is so much better and they tend to run a bit cooler as well. And especially because on the rear of this truck is drum brakes. So we only have discs on the front. So the discs on the front here do a hell of a job. They really do provide probably 80 to 90% of the braking stopping power of this vehicle. Having drums on the back, the only advantage with having a drum brake set up on the back is the handbrake. The handbrake is better on these because it uses the entire drum rather than a little small drum that's built into the disc, a la the later model rear disc brakes that most people would be familiar with. The early 75s, the drums, but the drums don't work, they don't really stop that well.
Yeah.
Oh, it's going. Oh, shit. Right. Well.
That probably sums up all of our mechanical elements of our grand tour.
Just about wraps her up. That really was, yeah, more or less the mechanical part of it. That was sort of the ins and outs, the nuts and bolts type thing, and gives you a bit of an idea of our setup. As you probably gathered, it's actually quite standard in a lot of ways. There's not a lot of trickery going on there, not a lot of modifications mechanically speaking.
pretty basic Toyota, really. It's how we like to keep it.
We've kept it pretty Toyota, absolutely, when it comes to that. Obviously we've modified the shit out of everything else, but yeah. Mechanically it's still a Toyota.
We still want to talk to you a bit more about our comms, about our spares, you know, things like first aid kits and things like that, what we carry on the road, what we don't carry and why, but thought we might make that another video. Hopefully that gives you a bit of a better idea of our mechanical setup and just how standard the Wide Ox is.
And why the 75 series is the ultimate overland tourer.
Thanks so much for watching, guys, really appreciate it. Let us know in the comments if there's anything else that you want to know about the Wide Ox mechanically or otherwise, and make sure you like us and subscribe to see more content from us in the future. Thanks for watching.